Take your seats, movie fans. The film's about to start. Welcome to Craft to Services, the show where we look at the bad films of cinematic history, the movies that critics rejected but audiences embraced. I'm your host, Aaron Coker. I'm also the host of the Just Enough Trope podcast and the Enterprising Individuals podcast on this, the Just Enough Trope Network. You can find out more at justenough.trope.com. Joining me on the show today is David R. George III. David is the New York Times and USA Today best-selling author of over 24 novels, novellas, and short stories set in the Star Trek universe. He also co-authored with Eric Stillwell the story for the Star Trek Voyager episode Prime Factors. He's a former contributor to Star Trek Magazine, and he's a film reviewer and blogger at his website, moviereviewsbygeorge.com. Dave, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Aaron. Happy to be here.
It's great to have you. I know from our previous conversations on Enterprising Individuals that you are a lifelong movie fan. Have you seen any good films lately?
You know what? I just went to a screening of Crazy Rich Asians, which based on a Kevin Kwan novel that I did not read and I didn't really know anything about. But it's a film that features I was going to say a predominantly Asian cast, but I think perhaps an entirely Asian cast now that I look back on it. And it's the first American film with an Asian cast in 25 years, I think, since the Joy Luck Club. And it's essentially a romantic comedy, and it's good. It's funny. It's charming. The acting is very good. Anything with Michelle Yeoh in it has got my vote to watch. Sure. So, but yeah, it was very good. I enjoyed that very much. I'm trying to think what else we've seen lately. Actually, I watched a film last night from 1949 called Champion with Kirk Douglas.
Okay.
I don't know if it was his first Academy Award nomination, but I think it was. He was nominated for Best Actor. He didn't win. Broderick Crawford won for All the King's Men, which won Best Picture that year. But right. I think it's the movie that, if it wasn't his first Academy Award nomination, it must have been. I think it's the movie that catapulted him to fame.
Sure.
And Arthur Kennedy also got a Best Supporting Actor nod, and I think was nominated for black and white cinematography and its script, its score, Dmitri Tiomkin's score, and it won for best film editing. Won an Academy Award for best film editing, and it's a boxing film, but it's a really interesting movie because it's Kirk Douglas's character. You start out rooting for him, and he just devolves into not a very nice person, which is kind of a surprise.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love early Kirk Douglas movies. One of my favorites is Paths of Glory, Kubrick film.
Kubrick film, yeah, terrific.
Well, I know that you're a baseball fan as well, and baseball, of course, is a popular subject for films. Do you have a favorite baseball film?
You know, it's really interesting because I'm such a baseball fan. I mean, I'm a lifelong Mets fan, which means I have a whole series of other problems. I also play baseball in an amateur league, and so I really love baseball, which tends to make me dislike most baseball movies because I don't find them very convincing very often.
Okay, sure.
But you asked my favorites, and a movie that I would say involves baseball and sort of gets, not just involves baseball, but gets to the heart of what baseball is, or at least what it means to me, is Field of Dreams.
Yeah. Which
was based on a W.P. Kinsella novel called Shoeless Joe. And then I love W.P. Kinsella. He was a terrific writer, and virtually all of his stuff is baseball-oriented, short stories and novels. But the novel Shoeless Joe, which was a good novel, was not anywhere near as good as the film.
So they improved it in the adaptation.
Yeah, which is unusual. I mean, usually you always hear, the book is so much better than the movie.
Right.
In this case, even though the book was good, the movie was much better. They rearranged, the writer, I think it was Phil Alden Robinson, I think he wrote and directed. He rearranged the story. The crux of the story in the novel was getting Shoeless Joe Jackson to arrive at the field, at the baseball field amidst the corn in Iowa. Early on, when dead ball players start showing up, the protagonist thinks, I'm getting dead ball players to show up. I can get my dad to show up. That's at the beginning of the novel. They rearranged the story for the movie so that the climax was that his father, with whom he did not have a good relationship, shows up at the end. And it's just an unbelievably poignant and emotional moment in the film. And just really, it's just an interesting exercise because, like I say, you so very rarely hear that films are better than the movies upon which they're based. And that's definitely the case with that one.
Yeah, that's so fascinating that just as somebody who is well-versed in baseball and sort of an expert on it, you get taken out of or don't appreciate baseball films. I find that I love baseball as well, and I'm probably not as knowledgeable as you, but I know a lot about it. What always takes me out of baseball films is that they almost always have one tone, which is that of like nostalgia or like this tricky appreciation for the emotions of the game, you know, and they're very rarely something that really has like high stakes drama or something that's compelling. It's always about, oh, we love this game and it brings families together. That is, you know, the purpose of Field of Dreams, and I think it works really well in that film. But every other film is this sort of schmaltzy kind of affair.
I mean, you could argue that even Field of Dreams is schmaltzy, but it works. Yeah, it works, you know. But I think the thing about baseball for me, I think one of the things that I appreciate about the sport itself is that, this may sound unusual, but I find the sport itself literary. I mean, at the very basic level, the object of the game is to be safe at home. I mean, it's easy to go from there to just try and have some analogies and similes and metaphors and all of this about baseball to to life. Right. And actually, I had a very close friend who is about 12 years ago now, who actually had an accident, was clearing the gutters on his roof and fell off the ladder and hit his head and was in a coma for a while. And he recovered, and so that's the good news. While he was in the hospital and we were not sure what was happening to him, I wrote to him. I sent him some emails just to deal with my emotional turmoil and my hopes that he would be okay. I played baseball with this guy. We were in the same league together and played in tournaments. And so one of the things I said to him in one of the emails was, I can't wait until you're safe at home. I mean, I used it right there. So, and baseball lends itself to that. And I've read plenty of good baseball short stories and novels, but haven't seen as many good movies. The Natural is a terrific novel, not such a great movie. I mean, there are things about The Natural that I really enjoy. It's very cinematic, very sort of theatrical, actually, almost. And, love Robert Redford and all. But I don't know, the movie just doesn't quite work for me. It doesn't really seem to make a whole lot of sense, actually, the story.
Yeah, I'd be right there with you. If I had a podcast about overrated movies, I think The Natural would be one of the first ones that we covered.
I liked League of Their Own as well. Although I didn't love it, for one thing, because Gina Davis couldn't play baseball, and that was clear. So it just takes me right out of the movie. Lori Petty could play, not so much Gina Davis. Sure. And it was funny, and I liked it. But it's not, for me, Field of Dreams is the pinnacle. I did watch recently Fear Strikes Out with Anthony Perkins.
Oh, okay, sure.
As Jimmy Pearsall, who suffered from mental illness. This is a true story. And the movie, which is interesting, the movie was based on a book that Pearsall himself wrote, and it took his father to task, really, for his upbringing and for just relentlessly trying to get his son to play baseball. He couldn't make it as a big leaguer himself, and so he wanted his son to make it. And it was just this crushing pressure on Jimmy Pearsall. And then the movie really, it just showed this. It didn't tell you. It just showed you what a domineering father, played by Carl Malden, Jimmy Pearsall had. And it was really interesting, but it was a pretty good film, especially for its time. But what was peculiar about it, and unfortunately Anthony Perkins clearly couldn't play baseball either, but I got past that because it was a really good story. But reading about it later, I discovered that Jimmy Pearsall disowned the movie because it blamed his father too much. But it was based on a book he wrote. So,
Okay, all right.
I'm not sure where that disconnect came in. It's kind of peculiar.
Yeah. Did you ever see the Michael Keaton movie Game 6?
Yes, as a matter of fact, how could I, a New York Mets fan?
I was just asking.
Yeah, you know what? I don't remember much about it. I did see it though a few years ago. There's not really much to the movie. I think there's more for somebody who is a Mets fan, and not just a casual Mets fan, but a long time and deeply involved Mets fan, will get more out of the film because of the backdrop of Game 6. Game 6 of the 1986 World Series, one of the classic come-from-behind, impossible games that the Mets ended up winning, and then that catapulted them to the World Series victory. So I liked it for that, but as a film itself, I like Michael Keaton a lot, and I think he did good, but a good job in that film. But I don't know that it was a great film. I don't even know where you are. I don't know if you're in New York, if you're a Mets fan. Or, I would assume you're not a Mets fan because you sound emotionally stable.
I'm hiding it well because with your beloved Mets' 1986 World Series victory, I have to deal with the Minnesota Twins winning the World Series in 1987, and then of course in '91, just as I was becoming a teenager and having the things that I would love and care about for the rest of my life being set in stone, and then of course they go completely dry. Just a winless streak up until this point. So I have a sort of it's like the Midwest version of loving the Mets or the Red Sox or something like that.
Well, I've gone longer. It's been 86 is longer than 87.
That's true. You've got me on that one. That's absolutely true. You have your master's degree in mathematical sciences, and I've read that you conducted research on artificial intelligence in completing your thesis.
I did. I wrote an original thesis. My research was on automatic theorem proving, which I think, although I haven't kept up with AI, other than sort of a casual reading every now and then of articles and such, I think AI has come a long way. I mean, it's not real science fiction or artificial intelligence at this point, but machine learning was, when I wrote my thesis, was not a thing, and now machine learning is a big deal, and they're really putting a lot of time and effort into finding out how to make machines learn. But I based my research. Did I say this on automatic? I not only researched but coded the preliminary stages, because I couldn't do the entire thing because it would have taken me years or decades. Right. But I certainly at the time too, because we were dealing with a time where there was a lot less memory available for computers and things like that. But my thesis was on my research was into. I did an automatic theorem prover for Euclidean plane geometry. So basically, I wanted to be able to take a hypothesis and be able to mathematically prove it. So build a mathematical proof, a rigorous mathematical proof with then required constructions and each step and each reason that brought you to the next step. And again, I went through the preliminary stages of that. I did the coding on that and wrote a thesis that I haven't seen in a long time, but it's over 100 pages. So, and it got
wow.
So, yeah.
You've already talked about how your experience with baseball colors your view of baseball films. Are there any films about robots or artificial intelligence that you think really get it right or even really get it wrong?
I enjoyed, what was the film with, I can't even think of the actors' names. A couple of years ago, the guy who did, now I can't even think of that film's name. Well, that's great.
Yeah, you've got a memory problem.
Yes, Oscar Isaac and...
Ex Machina.
Ex Machina, yeah. terrific. I'm trying to think of what was the guy's follow-up film to that with Natalie Portman and Oscar Isaac?
Annihilation.
Annihilation.
Yeah.
Right. Those are the two films I was trying to think of.
Sure.
I liked Ex Machina very much. I thought that was a pretty good film. Artificial intelligence is an interesting thing because I don't know that science fiction has quite got it right yet at all, even in print, where we're going with what it's going to mean to have artificial intelligence. We've got all sorts of people like Stephen Hawking and others saying that once we get to the moment of the singularity, where we have genuine artificial intelligence, that's R.I.P. for mankind.
Okay.
They're just going to wipe us out after that. There are a number of people who believe that, and Stephen Hawking was a smart guy, so
right.
I think that's an interesting. There was another film with Johnny Depp.
Transcendence.
Transcendence. That was just awful.
That's what I mean. I haven't seen it.
Oh man, it was really, really tough. It was a difficult film to watch. It sort of started out, as I recall. I mean, not a lot of it even stays with me. But I think it started out all right. But it just devolved into something where what was happening wasn't making any sense.
Okay.
But there was another film, a recent film that I enjoyed with. It was Scarlett Johansson.
Are you talking about Lucy?
Yes, Lucy. Did you see Lucy?
I did see Lucy. I also saw Her, that Scarlett Johansson was the voice of the AI in that one.
Right. I liked Her as well. I thought Her was really interesting. And actually, I think Her was a very good film because it was, I think, much subtler than anything else we've seen with respect to artificial intelligence. It pointed out something that I think really is prevalent, certainly was and probably is still prevalent in modern day AI, which is that it's not really artificial intelligence, it's the illusion of artificial intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's just when you've programmed something to emulate, that's different than programming something to think. But it also, it starts bringing up deeper questions about, okay, well, what about mankind? Are we are all our thoughts and actions deterministic because we essentially have this complex machine in our head?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, if your thoughts are just the result of a physical state of your brain, does that mean that everything's deterministic? That we genuinely don't have free will? That we're just the result of the physical brain? I don't know. Her sort of touches on those ideas because here we have was it Joaquin Phoenix? Who was the?
Yes, Joaquin Phoenix. Yeah.
Joaquin Phoenix is thinking that he's having this unique experience with this operating system, but it turns out not so much. I mean, she's having this unique experience with everybody.
Right.
So the only thing that's unique about it really is him. So that was a really interesting film.
I also really liked that once the AI or the AIs become sort of self-aware. In the story, like they don't go Terminator and try to kill everybody. They just don't really care about humans anymore. They're kind of moving on and doing their own thing. And we've been making monsters. I mean, we're going to talk about a monster movie today. We've been making monsters out of robots and artificial intelligence since Metropolis or maybe before. But it seems like it's only in the last few decades that we've really seen films that explore or at least are trying to explore, taking the first steps, the nature of an artificial mind. I have to be careful to stay on the right show here, but I think probably like Data from Star Trek has really helped shape the idea, I think, in fiction of a benevolent artificial intelligence that he just wants to learn and become human ultimately.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, I think you can probably go back a little farther than that to, Robbie the Robot and Forbidden Planet. But, but yeah, I think Data really stepped that up considerably. And also, I mean, all of Star Trek's quote-unquote artificial characters like the Doctor and Voyager. So, it's, because the Doctor really, in some ways is even more interesting than Data, and sort of more definitely an artificial intelligence, because he's not a physical. I mean, sometimes there's the gray area in Voyager, but he's not a physical being, really.
Right.
In that sense, I mean, he just started out as a software collection. So, interesting stuff.
Well, Data's always talking about his ethical subroutines, which I hope are well protected. You wouldn't want them to be hacked or glitch out just as he's going to give you a back rub, or if he's piloting the ship and he augers it into an asteroid or something like that. But hopefully we'll alleviate Stephen Hawking's fears by having some sort of ethical program or standard in our artificial intelligence.
Well, that's the thing. Who's writing the ethical subroutines?
Exactly.
Right? Hopefully it's not Martin Shkreli or.
Oh boy.
Just to pick a name out of the news.
No, that's a good name to pick out of the news. Well, I'd love to keep talking about that, but we should probably get to our film of the day. I have to remind our audience that the name of the show is Craft to Services. On every episode of this podcast, we look at a film that is poorly rated, generally lower than 50% on Rotten Tomatoes, but one that was well remembered by audiences at large. In the case of today's film, all that shit gets thrown right out of the airlock, because we'll be talking about a film that is universally beloved now, but it was certainly a groundbreaking, misunderstood classic when it debuted in 1979. I'm talking, of course, about Ridley Scott's second feature film, Alien. In 2018, Alien is unquestionably a classic film of the American New Wave, launching the careers of its director and star, popularizing the work of artist H.R. Giger, and revolutionizing the monster in space genre, spawning, pun intended, its own film franchise of 8 films with undoubtedly more to come, as well as endless tie-in fiction, comic stories, and video game properties. And Alien's had many imitators over the years who failed to capture the film's delicate balance, its haunting tone, its sci-fi horror thrills, not the least of which Ridley Scott himself, who's recently returned to the franchise with 2 inferior prequels. But whatever strange alchemy was involved in its making, Alien remains an early high-water mark for science fiction and horror filmmaking. Before we get to the main course, if you will, of what we're talking about today, I'd be interested to find out, are you a fan of the sequels and prequels and spin-offs in the Alien franchise?
Well, I would say no. I would just sort of, I was astonished when you said that there were 8 sequels.
Yeah.
I'm like, 8? Are we up to 8? But I think, okay, wait, there's Alien versus Predator. Right.
Yes, you have to
those. So I'm thinking, okay. I just recently watched the latest.
The one with the 2 Michael Fassbenders.
Yeah. I was really, really disappointed in it. I wanted to like it, and of course, all of these films, for the most part, look beautiful because they do deal with. They have H.R. Giger's spectacular Alien Covenant.
Okay.
The spectacular artwork that is haunting and original. You talked about not being able to find the balance, the sequels being able to find the balance the original film had, but also while the artwork is beautiful, the set design is always great, it's also, at this point, derivative.
Yeah.
H.R. Giger's work in Alien in 1979 was spectacular, but that's nearly 40 years ago.
Right,
so, time to move on, right? Show me something different. Show me something new. It's still great, but I've seen it before. But that actually was the least of it. It seems to me as though the features are just a way of getting the alien or aliens on the screen in order to commit gruesome acts against.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's tiresome to me.
It becomes like, how does Jason come back to life this time, or how is Freddy going to get them this time?
I absolutely agree, and I also think it misses the point of the first film. I think they've gone very far afield. I've said for a long time, and plenty of people have disagreed with me, that Alien is not a science fiction film. Now, it has science fiction trappings. It's certainly in a science fiction setting, but for me, it's a horror film. And in many ways, it's the quintessential horror film. Because, for one thing, it doesn't, while it does have a couple of gruesome moments in the film, and really one in particular, of course, it's not about the gore. It's not the shock value from seeing somebody's head lopped off or they're being dismembered or whatever, how many horrific ways somebody can die. Because mostly you don't see the alien. It's not on screen for very much. It's a film that really ratchets up the tension by making you anticipate what's going to happen rather than showing you something happening, which is what a really, for me, what a really good horror film does.
Yeah, I agree. Before we get started, I want to reiterate, I always say on this show that we talk a lot about Rotten Tomatoes, but this podcast is not in the pocket of Big Tomato. We don't endorse Rotten Tomatoes. We just use it as a metric in this case. As a critic, what do you think of the popularity and the rise of aggregate review sites?
I actually don't use Rotten Tomatoes myself. I'll occasionally find myself glancing on there for something specific, usually. When I look at anything, I typically look at a site called Metacritic, but I don't even go on there very much. I like writing reviews. I was going to say I like reading them. I like reading reviews. I like writing reviews. The aggregators, generally they aggregate professional reviews, and then they'll also aggregate user responses, people who've gone on the site. And those I completely ignore because there's nothing really scientific about that, right? You could have, just 100 people who felt the need to reply on something because they really hated something, and that doesn't really tell me anything because there could have been many, many more people who loved a film and didn't go on the site, or vice versa. The professional aggregators, it depends. There are reviewers out there that I don't agree with consistently. In fact, there are very few movie reviewers that I really, really like. There are enough, but I find sometimes that there are outlets that if there's a review in there and they hate something, that's a really good indication that I'm going to like it.
Sure.
and vice versa. I do like, and historically have liked the reviewers at the New York Times back in the day, Vincent Canby, Pauline Kael, A.O. Scott. More sort of cerebral in their approach and with a deep understanding of the history of film. So you get not just a review of a film on its own, but in the context of whichever film they're reviewing. If it's a current film of the current movie making of the day, but also if you can, they'll put it in a historical context and bring up other films that maybe anticipated a current film or whatever. But generally I don't go on the aggregate review sites. There are so many movies in so little time. I'm going to make up my own decisions on what I'm going to see.
My big issue with them, or at least one of them, is that you say that they have professional reviewers, and I guess I should be kind of careful not to relieve myself where I eat as a sort of semi-professional reviewer myself. But I don't know who determines what's professional. On one line you can have something by David Denby, and the next one it's like themovievault.com, and you don't know who this guy is, and if he's just what gives him authority in his opinions, and then it just lumps them all together.
You know what? I think because I have spent so little time on Rotten Tomatoes, I'm really thinking more of Metacritic, where you can see that they'll have the beginnings of 4 or 5 reviews posted for a film, and below it'll say, see all 23 reviews. And when you bring up all 23 reviews, it's not the Movie Vault. It's the New York Times. It's Time. It's the Village Voice, Variety. I mean, it's what I would consider, I don't know, reputable is the right word, but people that I have historically understood to be reviewing in a professional way, to be reviewing with a certain amount of expertise, an expertise in being able to actually write, an expertise in understanding film. It doesn't mean I necessarily agree with them, but I I'm a writer, and I've written 18 novels, and the best review I've ever read of one of my works was a negative review. I didn't agree with it, but it was really well written and argued its points. So, you take from a review what you need to take from a review.
My apologies if there is a movie vault out there. This is not directed specifically at you.
I think what you're saying is those people, in a sense, have not been vetted, right?
Sure.
Everybody and their mother has a blog, and everybody can put their opinion out there, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's a great democratization of opinions, but the problem is somebody can write something about a film, and I have no idea if what they're, they could be 13 years old and have only seen 7 movies in their life, right? So that is not an informed review. Not that I would dissuade 13-year-olds who've only seen 7 movies from writing reviews.
Please.
Go for it.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't want to discourage that. Well, the movie that we're going to talk about today got varied reviews, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. It is, of course, Alien. It was released on May 25th of 1979. It clocks in at by today's standards, economical 117 minutes. It was a financial success at the box office. It made around $80 million on an approximate $8 million budget. And $80 million in 1979 money would be about $280 million in 2018 dollars. Although Fox initially claimed that with the cost of distribution and promotion, the film did not make a profit, which many people point to as an early example of Hollywood accounting. Mm-hmm. The ratings for the film currently sit at 97% on Rotten Tomatoes, 83% on Metacritic, 8.5 out of 10 on IMDb, and it's number 52 on IMDb's list of top-rated films. It's easily the highest-scoring film that we've ever covered on the show, and I do feel like I am getting away with something here, getting to talk about Alien on the show. But it will be proven that critics were, in some parts or in some ways, negative to lukewarm on the movie, and we'll talk about that later. It was directed, of course, by Ridley Scott. It's his second feature film after The Duelists in 1977. And prior to that, Scott had worked as a set designer for BBC Television, and he was a successful television and TV commercial director himself. The tagline of the film became one of the most recognized taglines of all time. It is, of course, "In space, no one can hear you scream," which was written by Barbara Gibbs, who is a copywriter for Fox and a wife of Philip Gibbs, who designed the poster for the film. And one quick note, in many foreign markets, the film was retitled The Eighth Passenger, or specifically in Hungary, it was titled The Eighth Passenger is Death, which I think it doubles as a great tagline for the film.
Mm-hmm. Sure. That "In space, no one can hear you scream" tagline, when I recently wrote, when I told you I watched Alien Covenant, and I actually wrote a review of it. I've got it on my website. And my title for the review was "In Space, No One Can Hear the Bad Reviews."
Yes. In space, no one can hear you yawn. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you summarize the story briefly?
The Eighth Passenger is Death, I think, pretty much sums it up.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. Yeah.
But it's actually one of the things about the film that I think is very compelling is you've got this ship, the Nostromo, that's returning to Earth. It looks like an oil refinery in space. And that's essentially what it is, some sort of processing facility, and this 7-passenger crew who've gone out to work, and now they're coming home. They're in suspended animation for the trip home, but then they're awakened because there is a distress signal is detected. Actually, I don't even know if they know it's a distress signal initially, but what seems to be an alien signal is detected. The crew's woken up from suspended animation. They investigate, and they find more than they bargained for.
Right. Yeah. It's such a simple plot. I mean, it's so light on plot, really, and there are suggestions and hooks, if you will, that definitely the franchise has used to extrapolate into more storytelling. But it's so finely executed, and it could have gone, as we've seen in later films, it could so easily go wrong or be trite or hackneyed. I like to compare it to scrambled eggs. Like, it's simple ingredients. It's butter, it's eggs, salt, maybe a little water or cream. But it can be so difficult to get the combination exactly right when you're cooking it. And we all know the difference. We've all tasted the difference between good and bad scrambled eggs.
Well, and the truth of the matter is that it's unbelievably difficult to make a bad film. It's impossible to make a good film. I mean, just the amount of coordination between human beings it takes to get any film completed and on the screen is astonishing. And if it ends up being good, it's unbelievable. You know, it's really interesting because I think you're right. The ingredients are very simple, but there are ingredients. And they do hook into these in later films. There are some ingredients that I think sometimes people don't remember that sort of add to the malevolence of the atmosphere of the film. The fact that you've got a 7-person crew, and it turns out that one of the crew is working against the rest of the crew.
Right.
Turns out to be an artificial life form, an android, who's actually doing the bidding of the company for which this crew is working, and they have now some of this may have changed as they retrofitted the chronology in future films, but basically you get the sense in Alien that this crew knows about this alien race somehow, and they see dollar signs. Because they think this is either they can weaponize it. I think that's it. Basically, they feel that they can weaponize it, that they can learn, they can take how the nature of this creature, this alien race. Turns out to be just one on this planet that comes back with the crew, but there could have been others. They want to take it and make money out of it because it's powerful. It's one of my favorite lines in the movie after the face-hugging alien has died. Like, be careful, you don't know what it's going to do. And I think it's Yaphet Kotto who says that thing it bled acid when it was alive. You don't know what it's going to do when it's dead.
Right, yeah. And then the corporate man, Ash's response to that is like, well, I don't think it's going to be a zombie. Like, he's completely ignoring those fears. Also, having that character who's among the characters that are threatened, who's actually a threat himself, it's very reminiscent of something that I think probably helped inspire this. 10 Little Indians. It's sort of a and then there were none situation.
Right.
I think this is my favorite type of movie, the haunted house in space. Like the movie where you've got people in a ship or a base and they can't get out; they're trapped with something.
Right, it's the thing.
I really enjoy those.
Yeah, it's and I think Roger Ebert hated the film when it came out.
Yeah,
I think Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert both didn't like it, and I think Roger Ebert said it's just a haunted house in space. And the problem there is the word "just." He might not have said exactly that, but that was his intent. And the word "just" or the idea "just" is wrong because it's not just a haunted house in space. It is the quintessential, exceedingly well executed haunted house in space.
Right. Yeah.
It reminds me of. I was thinking about it, and it put me in mind of Psycho. Psycho is a movie that's, I think, at this point, generally considered a masterpiece. But when it came out, it was also reviled. That's our next episode, Psycho.
Okay, all right, I got that down.
but it's the kind of thing where it really broke new ground. I mean, have we seen haunted house movies before Alien? Yeah, but it was different. It was high tech. It was, but it had it hit the tropes, right? I mean, it was claustrophobic because these people were trapped on this ship. They're trying to get out. And, the first person to die is John Hurt, who's an engineer, I guess. But the second person, I think, to die was Tom Skerritt, who was the captain. Mm-hmm. Oh, by the way, spoiler alert.
I think the second person to die was, there's going to be spoilers all throughout this.
Yeah.
Was Harry Dean Stanton's character gets grabbed by the alien.
Oh, okay, all right. But Tom Skerritt, was he the third person? You don't in a movie like this, you don't expect not only the captain of the ship, but the first actor in the credits to die halfway through the film.
Yeah.
So pretty much all bets are off.
Right. Can you remember the first time that you saw the film and your reaction to it?
Yeah, I mean, I remember seeing it. On the big screen, and it was the audience jumped multiple times, sure. Which I thought was. I don't know why I was sort of paying attention to that, but it was also very quiet. People were really rapt. They were really focused on what was going on, and I think that was because of the tremendous tension that Ridley Scott developed. I mean, the film is, I would say, haunting in many ways. The atmosphere is haunting, not just because these people are being hunted. At least, partway through the film, they start being hunted by something that seems just impossible to kill. They're also, the atmosphere of the ship is haunting, right? Yeah, the ship is old. I mean, it looks old. It looks like it's had a long functional life, and it's dark and dreary. And I think that contributes to it. I mean, there are bright, shiny areas like the sick bay and things like that, but the ship, by and large, is just it's technological, but it's technologically sort of secondhand. And actually, that's sort of interesting to watch now, because I have no doubt that the technology was state of the art. And sort of from the outside, before anybody starts interacting with the computer, it kind of looks cool and like it will be functional and modern. But then when you start seeing the non-proportional fonts, the white letters on the blue screens or whatever it was, it's very rudimentary for today's technology. Obviously, I mean, the movie's almost 40 years old, so you expect that. But it's still, for me, it still sort of works.
Yeah, there's a real verisimilitude to the world as well. I mean, there's something pleasing about the utopian kind of hotel lobby aesthetic of a Starship Enterprise D, but just seeing, some of us have had industrial jobs, or we've seen industrial work before, and you can just kind of believe the kind of forklift aesthetic, or like anybody who's worked with computers in an industrial setting know that those aren't like Windows 10 tablets. Like a lot of times you're working with like green or orange CRT screens. And so the whole thing just de-emphasizes the fact that, oh my God, we're in space. We're tens of light years away from home. It's amazing. Forget that. We're just workaday people. We're like space truckers. And so you can forget about that, and you can identify with the people and really get scared when they get scared.
Well, I think that also, that directorial choice of the people acting like workaday people, right? I mean, when they've been woken up and they've dealt with all this, and then they have a meal, and they're grab ass, and then they're just dropping comments on each other and talking over everybody. There's multiple conversations going on, and it just seems that sort of helps ratchet up the tension, because when, like you say, when they get scared, the audience gets scared. Because they're not scared at first. This is just their jobs, and they're going, doing what they have to do, and all of a sudden things get scary.
Yeah. The origin of the script and really, so the film itself is very interesting. And it all kind of starts with, have you seen the documentary Jodorowsky's Dune?
No, it's on my list. Have you seen it?
Yeah,
Great.
I have. You definitely need to see it. In the film, they interview Jodorowsky, and he talks about this production of Dune that he was going to make. This is before the David Lynch one, the Dino De Laurentiis one, and he had gotten all this talent together. He had gotten Mobius and Giger to both work on the art, and one of the people that he had gotten to work on special effects was Dan O'Bannon, who got his start on the film Dark Star with John Carpenter. Right. And so all of these artists had kind of cross-pollinated and worked with each other. And then, of course, the film, which was way too ambitious, sort of fell apart. And at that point, O'Bannon, who'd been living in Paris working on the film, went home and was broke. Like, he had been there for 6 months. This thing had fallen apart. And he ended up living on the couch of a co-writer and friend named Ronald Shusett. And they started working on this idea that O'Bannon had for this script. And he had the idea for an alien monster. In Dark Star, he was frustrated because in Dark Star, in which he also played a role, they had no money. And the alien was literally a beach ball in that movie. And so he wanted to do like a scary version of Dark Star, but hopefully, with studio money and have a creature. And he'd been influenced by this art, this particular painting that he had seen of Giger's, of this strange creature, which we come to know today as the xenomorph from the Alien films. And so the two had worked out this script, originally called Star Beast and later retitled to Alien, and nobody in Hollywood wanted this script. It was too weird, it was too gory, and they were about 2 steps from selling it to Roger Corman to make into a B-movie until a friend of theirs sort of sent it to Walter Hill. Of course, the famous Walter Hill, 48 Hours, The Warriors, writer, producer, director. And he and his producing partners, David Glear and Gordon Carroll, basically picked it up, rewrote it, changed a lot of the dialogue, which was a point of contention for Dan O'Bannon, and added a few side elements, and then pitched it to Fox as this thing in the wake of Star Wars. Like, this is a sci-fi movie that could be really successful. And it was sort of off to the races from there until Ridley Scott himself was attached. And Ridley Scott was like, he was not the first choice for director. He was about 5 or 6 people back behind even Walter Hill himself.
Right.
But I think it was just the strength of the work that he had done, both in making The Duelists a good film, but also working with very little money. I think Fox was very interested in making a space movie for as little money as they possibly could.
Well, and the money that they did have is on the screen. It's on the screen it's really, it's even though they're on a ship and they are traveling throughout the ship as they hunt and then are hunted, there's a lot of darkness, so there's a lot of scenes where, things are in shadows and you can't really see very well. But the film is nevertheless sort of scene-oriented. On the alien ship, when they first find the larger alien and then the eggs for the xenomorph and all that, for the face hugger, and then the scene around the table. It's not a movie, even though it moves around a lot. It still is sort of very scene oriented up until Sigourney Weaver Ripley in the escape pod at the end. It picks locations and just stays there. And I think and whatever money they did have is on the screen in those scenes. And of course they were the ace in the hole here is H.R. Giger.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You can't talk about the design of this film without talking about him. Yeah.
No, I mean people hadn't seen anything like that before. Most people. He was not, as far as I think he had some following in Europe, but still not even very big at the time. And obviously this sort of catapulted him to fame, and not just because it was eerie, but because it was different, because people hadn't seen really this kind of thing before. This, I guess almost, I don't know, modern day Hieronymus Bosch, I guess.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I had always known that he was had designed the alien and some elements of the film, but it wasn't until I was researching it for this show that I found out how involved he was with the process. Like he was there basically before the shoot, for months, designing things, and then even once it was all set up, like you mentioned. The alien ship, the horseshoe and the space jockey's chamber, he was involved in the airbrushing and painting of all the scenes. He designed top to bottom and helped build the alien costume and the eggs. Like he was right down in there, like working as a scenic artist, like for the shoot of the film.
Well, and it shows, and it paid off for the film and for him. It's interesting. I don't think that you asked me about the sequels. Alien, like I say, I don't think of it as a science fiction movie. It certainly has science fiction trappings, but it's, to me, just a horror film. The subsequent films really are not horror films. And I think that's really sort of the disconnect. I mean, the second film, Aliens, the James Cameron production, is, I mean, I guess it's a war movie. It's a shoot 'em up. It's not a horror film, I don't think.
Right.
Right. And it sort of loses that thread, and it becomes much more, certainly with Prometheus and Covenant, becomes much more in the realm of science fiction, which is not a good or a bad thing. It just
yeah, sure.
It's removed the sequels from the original in a way that I guess is just sort of interesting, and I guess maybe good, but I don't know. You don't see a lot of films. You don't see a lot of horror movies that are subtle, right? It's really sort of odd to say that Alien is subtle because it has, some very graphic elements.
Well, yeah. But it's like music, though. There are quiet moments, that help accentuate the punch when the music gets loud, or fast. Yeah, and I have to really credit Ridley Scott for that. For this, he has this in all of his films, but I think he really understands that rhythm and the difference between the lows and the highs, and all the things that he'll do in his later career are already on display here. The sort of languorous dissolves that he has in between scenes, and the sort of amorphic sense of time. Something that really fascinated me was that he, of course, was really fascinated and inspired by Giger's art. And in the alien ship sequences, and whenever they were shooting something that was, drawn from Giger's stuff, he wanted to capture the quality of light that Giger had in his airbrushings and his paintings as much as possible. And so I know on the alien ship set, he had people going around creating smoke. They had almost like these Catholic thuribles getting smoke in the air, and then he would just take a big square of cardboard and sort of wave it all around so they could sort of permeate the sort of bloom of light that he would see in Giger's art.
That is those scenes in this alien ship. I remember the smoke very vividly because it passes through the blue laser light layer, and it's arresting. It's beautiful imagery, and also sort of spooky at the same time, and it gives you a sense of the unknown. And he did a spectacular job. The scenic design, the direction, all of it is of a piece, and it's really interesting to read the negative reviews contemporaneous to the film. Was it one reviewer? I think it might have been David Denby. Pretty much said that this movie lacks, any value whatsoever to society, and it's turned me off from movies. Period. That's pretty strong.
Yeah. Especially considering that he went on to write for another 35 years. So apparently he wasn't that turned off by films.
Right.
What do you think? We'll talk about some of the real negative reviews that I discovered in my research a little later on. But what do you think? What quality did the film have, or what was it bringing that really turned some people off, or just took them out of the paradigm of film watching that they understood, that they just couldn't, they had to refuse it in this way?
I hadn't really thought about that, but maybe it's because the film looked like a science fiction film, but it's not. Maybe they didn't expect a haunted house in space, although, in space, no one can hear you scream is kind of a hint that this may not be your typical science fiction film. But I think maybe, this was, you say 79, right? So it was in the wake of Close Encounters and Star Wars, these...
That's true.
These very... Close Encounters is heavier than Star Wars, but they're light. They're light movies, and I mean light, like physical light. They're bright, and there's a sense of wonder about them. At least in part. In Alien, there's none of that. It's dark. It's morose.
It's almost the lack of wonder, like we said before, is sort of what defines it and makes it compelling, at least to me.
Well, and I think that, and of course there were a couple of instances of gore in the film. I think that probably turned people off, blood and guts, and when you're not really expecting that it's not a slasher film, but those are the hallmarks of a slasher film, that graphic violence. But to me, and I don't like violence for violence sake, and I'm not drawn to slasher movies and things like that, but at the same time, Aliens, and it may seem not to be the case almost 50 years later, but for me, the Alien scene with John Hurt was groundbreaking. It was different. This is not something we'd seen before, and in fact, when they repeat it in the sequels, it's just really why. I mean, because it's expected. Well, so what? I've seen this before. I don't need to see it again. I could take seeing it the first time because I'd never seen it before, and it was gruesome and involving and moving and horrifying. And I like, when I watch movies, I like them to do something to me. I don't care if they make me feel uncomfortable. I don't care if they make me sad. I just want them to have some emotional impact. Make me laugh, make me cry, do something. And that movie, made my skin crawl in part. And that's I think that's a good thing. It gives, at least, I don't get to do that in real life. Good, that's great.
Yeah, right.
So let me experience it through cinema, and it did that. But I guess that might be why, that expectation of a science fiction film, and you get a horror movie, coupled with the fact that these science fiction movies of the era were very bright and light, and Alien was the opposite of that.
Yeah,
there was no sense.
I don't know if you've seen or if you remember the theatrical trailer, but they're not lying about this film. Like, they're letting you know exactly what you're going to get. This is the famous trailer. I think you can see it on YouTube, where it's very, there's no talking at all in it. And it's sort of panning over this rocky surface, and it pulls back to reveal that it's an egg. They didn't have the alien egg design at the time. It's just like a chicken's egg or something. But
right.
And then it starts to crack, and then we start to see these very quick cuts, which must have been very, we think about the MTV movie style of filmmaking now, but just these very quick frames of what's going on in the film, and the thrumming sort of music with the scream-like electronic strings, and the trailer itself is like harrowing. Like, you're like, oh boy, this is going to be a scary film.
Yeah.
I can see what you're saying, but I definitely don't think that they were trying to trick people into thinking that this was going to be some.
I don't think they were, but I think people's you would think critics would see trailers before they go see films, but maybe not. Maybe they also avoid them because they want to be able to make a decision just based on the film and not the marketing for it. I don't know.
Yeah.
But so maybe it's expectations, maybe it's not. But it's interesting that there were good reviews, but there were a lot of bad reviews. There certainly weren't 97.5% of good reviews that we see now for Alien. Alien's sort of considered a classic. But what's interesting is that the follow-ups generally are not. Although I think Aliens was fairly popular.
For sure,
James. But to me, it wasn't the same movie. You don't want it to be the same movie. But to me, it was a departure. It sort of took this alien creature and multiplied it, and to me, it lessened the impact of the creature, because this one creature was almost impossible to kill. This thing gets thrown out into the vacuum of space and continues to fight.
Yeah, right.
Right? It's got a harpoon through the chest, and the thing's out in space, and it's continuing to fight. So this is just an unbelievably strong creature and powerful creature. And then we get to Aliens, and there are lots of them, and the Marines can defeat them. They take their casualties, but I know it lessened the impact of the creature for me, seeing Aliens. And I felt like it was just a shoot 'em up. It was well done and all, but it just wasn't my thing.
And Cameron, in between Terminator 2 and Aliens is kind of, at that time, it was the master of taking a sequel and kind of going in a different direction and kind of not necessarily thematically living up to the first film, but definitely doing something different with it. I love T2, but it totally throws T1 into a cocked hat in terms of its message of, like, you know, how to what fate is and whether you are a slave to your fate or not. Like, they don't fit together at all. They're both great movies,
right.
But
Cameron was good at is good at the commercialization of ideas.
Yeah. Worked for Corman for a long time.
I mean, he saw Aliens in Alien and was able to, you know, Aliens probably did, I would guess, a lot more business than the original.
Yeah, I'm sure it did. He saw that and went, that's going on a lunchbox.
Right. Yeah. So, and, you know, I guess there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. It's just, to me, the first film was the more interesting of all the ones that followed. I don't believe I've seen the Alien and Predator movies.
I can't even remember if I have. That's how you know, unimpactful they are.
Right.
We should talk about the cast, I think, definitely, at least for a little bit. We talked about Tom Skerritt before. Something that, for me, shows that the cast and crew knew that they had something on their hands here that was good was the enthusiasm of the members of the cast. I read a story that said that Tom Skerritt originally was offered the role and he read the script before it had been rewritten by Walter Hill and didn't like it. And then after the rewrite, he went back to the producers and said, okay, I'll do it. And also, can I give you some of my salary for some points on the back end? Because I think this is going to do really great. He was very enthusiastic. And Yaphet Kotto also, I guess he was friends or he was an acquaintance of O'Bannon's before he had even wrote the script. And as he was developing the script, he was telling Kotto about it. And Kotto was like, I want to be in that movie. And he actually waited for years to get the chance to play a role in the film. So the people who were in it knew that, you know, they were working on something that was really great. Of course, it's an ensemble cast, and you don't even really know who's going to live, which is really raises the tension in the film. And you definitely don't know that it's going to be Ellen Ripley because, you know, Sigourney Weaver's not a star at this point. This is her first, really major role in a motion picture, and she sort of falls into the role of the sort of de facto lead in the film, just by the virtue of surviving to the end.
Not only that, I would suggest that in the late 70s, in that era of filmmaking, it's less than likely that the ultimate survivor is going to be one of the two female actors in the film. This was not a thing at the time. That's just not the way films were being made, you know, stories were being told at the time.
Yeah. On that subject, what do you think about the idea of the final girl trope in horror? Do you think that Ripley fits into that trope?
Well, how long has that trope been around now? I mean...
So it's really interesting. I was looking into this a little bit, and when you think about the kind of modern horror that we expect, and I'm not talking about like Frankenstein or like 50s Hammer horror, you know, like a slasher or a monster film, it's really like 74, like Texas Chainsaw Massacre. That was really the advent of that. And that term, the final girl, is from a book by an author named Carol Clover. She wrote a book called Men, Women, and Chainsaws from 1992. And so she came up with that term and then started saying, oh yeah, Laurie Strode is a final girl, Ellen Ripley's a final girl, and so on and so forth. But there are a lot of people who disagree with specifically Ripley being a final girl simply because she doesn't meet some of the characteristics, or they just don't think that she represents what, you know, that final girl trope is supposed to be.
I don't think she does either, because a lot of times that I think that final girl trope is based on a level of sexuality, which is not to say that Ellen Ripley doesn't have her own, you know, level of sexual appeal or whatever. But there's a little in the dinner scene. Yaphet Kotto makes some remarks, and you know he's some sexual innuendo and all of that. Maybe not innuendo, right. Just flat out sexual remarks. But it's all, I don't want to say necessarily in fun, but it's just, you know, people who know each other and they're just talking. There's no, you know, I think the final girl is based on vulnerability, right?
Yeah.
That here's a female character who's vulnerable, typically tends to be sexually appealing, has a relationship with a male character, and somehow manages to survive to the end of whatever ordeal they're going through. I don't think. Yes, Ellen Ripley's a female character, but there's no romance in the film. There's not really any sexual tension or anything sexual in the film. It's she's just a strong person who happens to be a female, and she also has one of the better defined personalities. Her character has one of the better defined personalities in the film. She's a by the book kind of person, and
she's kind of the kind of person that in a normal situation you might be a little annoyed by or be like, oh boy, well, Ripley's going to give us a hard time about this. But when the shit goes down, she's also the type of person that you want around for those exact same reasons.
Right, exactly, and it turns out that was she a by the book kind of person? That it comes off that way in Alien, but also she was wanting to enforce rules like not letting the crew, her fellow crew person, back on the ship with this alien attached to its face that they knew nothing about. It's not just maybe that she's hewing to the letter of the law. It's maybe that this is a common sense thing to do, and she does seem very common sensible in the rest of the film, and in dealing with the creature and wanting to destroy the ship and then deciding, oh geez, I can't destroy the ship, it's in my escape pod. She's just very matter of fact about everything, at the same time that she's experiencing this sheer terror and wanting to survive. So I don't really feel like she fits that trope in that way.
I really love how, and this is set up well in the script and in the action of the film itself, how she starts off as a very sort of ordered, put together person, like you said, professional. And then as the movie goes on, we see the effects of the stress on her to the point where she's screaming, "You bitch!" at the computer. The computer can't hear her, but it's just like we feel this just human outburst of like, she's really feeling something here. Like she's really going through this. Yeah,
it was incredibly well directed and extremely well acted. I think the cast, all of the cast, was terrific.
You mentioned sex before. I've always heard that one of the most unique and chilling aspects of the film are the themes of, well, not only parasitism, but a reversal of the sexual violence stereotype. That is that an alien can rape and impregnate a man. Do you think that is something that stands out the most, of the more Freudian aspects?
Yeah, I absolutely do. I mean, there wasn't traditional sex in the film, right? But I think, I don't even know if audiences watching the film would necessarily think consciously about that, but I think it's a very visceral thing that a person, in this case a man, has been physically violated with a, I'm going to say penetration. I mean, his body was penetrated, and I think that absolutely part of the thematic underpinning of the film. I think it really, I think it helps generate the horror, the terror that the characters feel and that the audience feels. I think this is one of the things that really repels them. And, in a way, it's I feel like it's a good thing that men would have a visceral reaction to this, and maybe it can, make them a little more empathetic to real-world concerns.
Something that really gets me about the film, and I'm not sure, if you look at this in terms of the entire series, I mean, I think it kind of falls apart, but there's I feel like there's no God in the Alien universe, or at least in the universe of the movie Alien, or if there is, he hates you, he hates us, because there's this creature that has evolved past any kind of compassion or morality that can even kill you when you are defending yourself. Like this idea that, sure, you've got a gigantic ore ship and a FTL drive, or however the ship uses itself. You've got science and you've got weapons and technology, but there's just this thing that's just going to kill you. There's nothing you can do. You can scream all you want. It's just going to rip your head off, and it's going to lay an egg in you. And how could it have? What kind of God would let something like this be created? Or even like, what kind of universe do we live in that a creature would evolve just merely to prey upon, people who don't want to harm it?
Yeah, it's. I think there are a couple of different elements to what you're saying too, and I thought about some of these things when I watched it recently in preparation for us having this conversation. The alien creature does not, and later films sort of address this in a way that you don't know is entirely fulfilling from a scientific standpoint. But in Alien itself, it doesn't. When you think about it, it doesn't really make sense that a creature like this would evolve.
Its life cycle?
Well, just over the course of time, imagine the environment it must live in to have developed these traits, bleeding acid, right, and having hinged jaws that can tear out a part of another creature. What environment must it have lived in for those traits to evolve and stick around? Because they were, obviously they would be valuable, I guess, in any environment, but we don't really need that here on Earth right now.
Yeah.
Right? So those traits, if random mutations diminished those traits and they disappeared, the creature, the species would still survive. So it doesn't make sense from a sort of an evolutionary standpoint that this creature would evolve unless it was, it just evolved in hell.
Right.
This clearly would be an apex predator, you would hope.
Yeah.
So
or maybe it's not even viable biologically. Like, the movies and the sequels go to great lengths to emphasize the fact that it's engineered. So it's just something that wouldn't necessarily occur in nature. But this theme of, this is another theme that's in the films, that the idea of the powers that be, or the greediness and greed of humanity, or even aliens in creating weapons, disregarding the value of human life. It being a result of that. That's something that in 8 films, I can't believe that it's not that I want them to dig into it more, but I can't believe that hasn't been dug into more. The idea of the company, like, they want it for a weapon. Who are they at war with? Like, we never find out if it's the other humans or if there are other alien races. It's just this idea was planted by, Walter Hill and his writing partners of, we need this, corporate overlords are bad, but it never really gets developed in all the years since Alien.
Right. And my feeling about it, and this is just from having watched it, is that it's not necessarily for weapons of war, for like nation states so much as it would be for terrorists and criminal bosses, criminal syndicates. This great tech because all the corporation cares about, they don't care about the weaponry or defense side of it. All they care about is making money from the weaponry or defense side.
Yeah,
of it.
Right.
So to me this seems like a wholly black market kind of thing. Maybe not. Just an idea that sort of pops up when I think about it. And really the shady nature, because apparently of the corporation sending Ash, the robot, the android, to make sure that they get the alien back, even though it violates laws. It violates human laws that are on the books. That we're told that in the film. So, because you're supposed to quarantine alien life. You don't bring it aboard, no matter what it is. A microbe. You're not bringing anything aboard because obviously bringing something back to Earth could be a terrible, terrible thing.
Sure.
So, it makes sense later, I think, even though the films weren't good, Prometheus and Covenant, to talk about the alien being engineered, because it doesn't make sense from an evolutionary standpoint, but it also doesn't make sense really, it would sort of be lazy writing for there to be this predator that all it did was prey. That there's, I mean, I guess, what is this, a wild animal? I guess lions and tigers and bears attack us, but lions and tigers and bears also care for their young, right? You see some level of not human emotion, but some emotion. There's some caretaking aspects. There's nothing in the alien. It's just it's like a machine. Yeah. And that doesn't. It's tough to get your head around. It works for one film,
Yeah, right. Yeah. I mean, it's an insect, really. I mean, it walks on two legs, but it's an insect that lays its young inside another host, and then insects don't care for their young. They're not mammals.
Right. That's true. But there is something to be said for brain size, right? Well, it's got a big head, but maybe it doesn't have
it's got a really big head. Yeah.
For me, the least impressive scenes, shots of the alien were at the end, where you actually got to see all of it once or twice.
Yeah.
Those were the least impressive, because at that point it looked like, oh, it's a guy in a suit. It was so strange and alien with the misshapen head, or the arcing head, the no eyes it's tremendous. That's another thing too. What is the sense that this creature has? Because it doesn't have, as far as we can tell, a visual sense.
Right. Yeah. Like how does it even see?
Right.
And I think that they knew that. They definitely knew that when they were making the film, that it was scarier if you couldn't see it.
Right.
The guy they had playing the alien, a guy named Balaji Badejo, was 7 feet tall himself.
Right.
But the alien only has 4 minutes of screen time, and I think they knew that was the way to go. There's like a deleted scene or some test footage that you can see on YouTube or on the DVD where you can see him, the alien, walking up to Veronica Cartwright. He's kind of crab walking.
Yeah.
And he stands up, and he's very imposing when he stands up, but it looks very silly. And I think they knew that they had to deal with that. Yeah. I wanted to talk really fast about Veronica Cartwright and just how good she is in this film and how thankless her role is. But it's a role that we really need. I don't know if you'd call her a scream queen. She's like a professional crier. I mean, she got her start early in The Birds, and of course she was in the remake of Body Snatchers, and she's sort of that actress, that woman who's like freaking out, and the other characters want her to shut up, but she really is the voice of reason. At one point she's like, let's get in the shuttle and get out of here. Like, why are you guys making some stupid plan to catch this thing?
Right.
Let's just go.
Right. Yeah, and I think she's absolutely a vital character, and I think the thing about her being just frantically scared is that she has every reason to be frantically scared.
Yeah,
I mean, it's one thing
yeah.
for somebody to be freaking out for no good reason. When you got a great reason, hey, freak out. I mean, do what you got to do. And, I think other than Ripley, almost all of the characters, maybe Ash, a lot of the characters are sort of, the actors are sort of in thankless roles, right? I mean, that's not to say that they're not good. They all are. They all do what they're supposed to do, and they do it well. But there's not a lot of character development, sort of, other than Ripley, right?
Yeah.
They're just sort of characteristics. And like for Veronica Cartwright, it's, okay, yeah, she's a scream queen, I guess, but she's also, like you say, the voice of reason, too. She's the one saying, okay, time to get out.
Yeah.
Eddie Murphy did a bit with when he said, black people and white people look at threats like this completely differently. If black people were in a house, they were looking to buy a house, and the realtor said, and the house is haunted, and they hear a voice. Eddie Murphy's like, it's a great house. Too bad we can't stay.
Yeah, we gotta go.
We're leaving.
Yeah, right.
We're out of here. And I mean, Veronica Cartwright, you're exactly right. She says we got to get out of here, and she's right.
Right.
And it's crazy that they don't. I mean, that is kind of a crazy decision at that point. But I guess they're also dealing with the fact that if they get out of there, they lose a lot of their income.
Yeah, that's true, and that drives them. We can talk, I guess, right now about maybe the parts where the movie doesn't quite. I mean, it's a very good movie, but maybe it's got several tiny little flaws, perhaps. And like one of them for me is we know that they're acting in their own self-interest a lot of the time. We also know that they don't understand the threat necessarily. Like they're looking for the alien. They think it's a tiny little thing and it's huge and it, tears apart Harry Dean Stanton. But when Dallas decides to go into the air vent to look for the thing, in a scene that they shot in one day, it was all shot in one day. It seems like the stupidest decision ever. And it's terrifying. It's a great work by Ridley Scott in making what is essentially a guy just sitting in a tube in the dark, and then Veronica Cartwright just looking at a screen and going, "Get out of there! Get out of there!" It's fraught. Like it is one of the scariest scenes in the film.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
But why would he go in there? It's.
I don't know. Chalk it up to machismo, to leadership responsibility.
Yeah, how big are these bonuses we're talking about?
Yeah, probably bigger for the captain, right?
Right.
But at that point, the captain hasn't seen. Has he? At that point, he hasn't seen the larger alien. He knows it because.
Yeah, nobody has, because they specifically. I've heard this on the commentary on the DVD that they had boarded a scene where they discover Harry Dean Stanton's body, I think, or at least they find like a lot of blood, and instead they just cut that and have it cut right to Parker showing us, the gun or the thing that he was carrying, and just saying, we didn't find anything, like there was nothing there.
Right.
So at this point they haven't seen it. They don't know that it is a giant monster.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So all right, it makes it a little bit more believable then that he would, if he thinks it's just a small thing. Yes, it's burst out from inside John Hurt, but it's not. We don't know how formidable it is yet. It was making little chittering sounds and ran away.
Right.
So
it's gross,
and didn't
but
to have eyes. Gross, but maybe not as formidable as
Maybe the cat will catch it. Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
I also think this is a tiny little blemish, but I also think that it's really kind of superfluous that Ash is a robot. Like, it's very cool. It leads to Bishop in Aliens, which is one of my favorite characters in sci-fi. But if you took that out, it wouldn't really matter. And not just him being a synthetic being or a robot, but also him being sort of a company stooge. It was one of the criticisms that O'Bannon had about the rewrite, is that he didn't like it because it's what he calls like the Russian spy. Like you have like these thriller movies and there's some kind of plot. They're trying to stop this or that, but then they find out, in the end or beginning of the second act, beginning of the third act, that there's a spy or that there's somebody they have to catch. And It doesn't really have any effect on the plot at all.
I think my guess is there would be two reasons maybe for a writer to think about including that character. One is if you're trying to a realistic vision of things, it makes sense that if you've got a guy with an alien strapped to his face who no longer seems to be conscious, maybe the smartest thing in the world isn't to bring that guy and that alien onto your ship. All right? I mean, that just makes sense. It's just common sense. Yeah, you feel bad for the guy. You want to help the guy, but what are you going to do? You're going to put the rest of the crew at risk? That doesn't seem like a smart idea. So how do you get him aboard? And, of course, Ash is the solution to that. Doesn't have to be a robot in order to do that. The second thing would be after he's found out, he gives exposition about why he's there. Not that exposition is the greatest thing in the world, but they could have found that out in other ways. Perhaps now perhaps Sigourney Weaver finds if he was not a robot, maybe she could find his orders in his bunk or whatever. There are other ways to do that. But I think the notion of the sci-fi setting of the film sort of encourages that kind of thing. I get the sense that the opinion that Ash didn't need to be there at all as a spy, and he didn't, certainly even if he was there, need to be a robot. But it didn't bother me so much. I thought it was interesting in a way because it spoke to the fact that, okay, there are two villains in this film. The first and obvious villain is the alien, the eponymous alien, But the second one is the avaricious human company that is trying to bring this, so that, I liked that aspect of the Ash character, that he was there for an inimical reason, for, reasons simply really of greed, which in a way sort of provides a counterpoint for the idea that these people will go hunting down the alien because they wanted to save their bonuses.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and without it, we'd lose. I was amazed to find out that speech was basically written on the day, the one that Ian Holm gives when he's just the head, and he talks about. He talks about, how perfect the creature is. And there's, of course, the twist of the knife where he's dying, but he's like, you guys are all going to die too. Like, I'm not going to lie to you. Like, I don't think you're going to get out of this. That was pretty great.
I believe I've read, but I don't know if it's apocryphal or not, that the most memorable scene with the alien popping out of John Hurt's chest, that the cast was not informed of exactly what would be happening.
Yeah.
Some of their reactions were really genuine with the splatter of the blood and all.
Yeah. They knew that, what was on the page, that, monster comes out of Cain. But other than that, they didn't know, and they weren't allowed on set really when it was being set up. And it was all shot in one morning, and basically in one take. They did it with 4 cameras. And of course, there's the famous story about how they told Veronica Cartwright that there might be a little blood. And there was, a jet tube of blood in there with also squibs that would blow viscera out, and they were all just covered. And so their responses are totally genuine. And you can tell, I think it absolutely works, but you can tell there are very quick cuts putting all that sort of their reactions together, because I'm sure if it goes on for even more than a few seconds, they're like, all right, fuck this, give me my agent. You can only get that natural reaction for so long before they're like, John, are you okay?
Right.
But that's all true.
Yeah, I had read that at some point. So and Veronica Cartwright's reaction really is kind of memorable too. I mean, she just looks repulsed.
And I also read that to have the alien run away, they basically had a split, like a groove in the table, and a guy on like a skateboard or a dolly under the table. So he just sort of dollies himself out, with the puppet on a pole or a stand, and then they blew air through a tube to make the tail sort of whip around as it sort of streaks out across the table, which is just such a simple effect, but it works so well. Yeah,
it really did. And this is in the age. I mean, we'd had Star Wars and Close Encounters, but there's no CGI at this point.
Well, at this point in the show, I usually dial in to check on the state of the robot holocaust. I have a theory that if a film opens with excessive voiceover or overly long title cards, or if the film opens over water, that famous helicopter shot where you're opening over some body of water and it pans up. I had a previous guest talk about when there's on-the-nose musical choices, or if we see the first thing we see is the main character. Those are all indicators that you're probably watching a pretty bad movie. But judged solely by that very subjective metric, none of those things are present here. Of course, the opening is very famous. We have the very distinctive slow building music, and the title described as by Ridley Scott as he wanted something hieroglyphic. So he got Steve Frankfurt and Richard Greenberg to design this title sequence where the word alien slowly builds in, and we pan across this. It's something they don't do anymore, this sort of matte painting, this beautiful art of a planet. And then we're up and we're rolling, and it's very sparse, and it's entirely adequate. So as far as the state of the robot holocaust, it's clear we've got nothing to worry about at this point. There's not a robot in sight, although my science officer keeps jogging in place randomly, so I'm a little worried about that.
I do think that the title sequence is, and I don't know if this is intentional or not, we would maybe think that it's intentional, but perhaps I'm reading too much into it. When the strokes of the letters of alien just slowly appear and form the title, initially you don't really know what it is. I mean, it's fairly quickly you can figure out, okay, it's going to be alien, right? But you're taking something, you're starting out with essentially, oh, wait a minute, what is that? Before you've ever seen it before, if first time you're watching it and you see this little shape appear and then another shape, it's not immediate that you think, oh, it's going to be the word alien necessarily. Right. And so it's you're in space. This is unusual. What is this? What's happening? I don't know. So you're going from the unknown to the known. We don't know about this alien. Now we know about this alien. I don't know. It could be sort of echoic of the plot, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's certainly also very stylish.
Yeah, oh, definitely, yeah. I think that Scott says, if you listen to the commentary from the 1999 DVD, he talks a lot about wanting, and I'm not sure what the source of this is, but like these Egyptian elements. He compared the title to hieroglyphics. I think it's changed in later films, but the Weyland-Yutani corporate logo is this sort of cartouche looking thing, these like wings that you'll see, and spray painting everything in the cargo holds gold to look sort of like a temple or some kind of Egyptian tomb. So that was definitely on his mind, I think, when he was building up. What I think is funny is, as the title builds, it also has the opening credits and the players, and at one point you just got one little line that looks like an eye, and then it says Tom Skerritt. So I thought, is it Tom Skerritt? Is it some kind of autobiographical thing about Tom Skerritt?
Right.
As we talked about at the top of the show, critics didn't exactly wet their pants on Alien's release. I mean, they might have out of fear, but not out of excitement. And I was taken aback at the amount of negative press that I found when I started really digging past the good things that you see from MovieVault.com. Got him again. Variety's review from 1979 had some good things to say, but one thing that stood out for me was they said that the picture isn't quite good enough to be a combination of The Exorcist and Star Wars, but it clearly wants to be. They also said that the script has more loose ends than the Pittsburgh Steelers, which was probably a killer reference in '79.
Yeah.
And they said that the roles were kind of cardboard. Time Out magazine said that the film was, quote, an empty bag of tricks whose production values and expensive trickery cannot disguise imaginative poverty. End quote. So I thought that was very fascinating. That was a hard one. David Denby, as you mentioned before, said, quote, occasionally one sees a film that uses the emotional resources of movies with such utter cynicism that one feels sickened by the medium itself. So it was certainly the cynicism that turned him off. He went on to say that, quote, the movie is terrifying, but not in a way that is remotely enjoyable.
The whole idea of people enjoying films where they get scared is an interesting one. And I don't know that I can entirely explain it, but I know that I have enjoyed it many a time, including with Alien. I think, that the one review that talked about it, clearly it wants to be a combination of Star Wars and The Exorcist, I think is completely off the beam. I think this movie has no interest in being Star Wars, none whatsoever. It does want to be The Exorcist. I mean, that's the genre that we're talking about. I've had people disagree with me. No, it's a science fiction movie with horror elements. No, it's a horror movie with science fiction elements. For me it is. And I think, this is The Exorcist. This is the unknown that wants to kill you.
Right, yeah. Exactly, yeah. I agree with you. I would say that Aliens is a sci-fi film with horror influences, but flip-flop for the first one, certainly. Well, as you mentioned before, Siskel and Ebert were critical of it. They actually said on their show, Sneak Previews, what you had said before, that it was just a haunted house movie in space. And they said it was disappointing in comparison to other space films like 2001, Star Wars, and Close Encounters. Although Ebert would later put the film on his great movies list and give it 4 stars. What do you think about critics doubling back or backtracking on their initial reviews?
It's a little bit of a cheat, let's say. It's kind of a thing where I guess it depends on your motivations, right? If you see a movie and you hate it, you just hate it, and you don't hate it just because of subjective reasons like I don't like horror movies, so I hated this movie. But you thought it was a bad movie, which is what Siskel and Ebert were saying, and these other reviews were saying, and this is not a good movie. They weren't saying it's a great movie, but I couldn't stand it because I don't like it. it's a bit of a cheat if everybody else in the world thinks it's great at some point, and you say, "Oh, okay, I'm going to change. I don't want to be on the wrong side of this, right?
Right.
I don't want to be the lone. But if it's a genuine desire to say, well, maybe I missed something in this, well, then go back and watch it again and see. And of course, times change, right? I mean,
oh, absolutely.
That has a lot to do with it. When you contextualize a movie, I mean, if Hitchcock's Psycho came out in 2018, having no history, it would be considered a yawner, probably.
Yeah,
right.
And it did. It came out in what was it, 96 or 97? Gus Van Sant did the just shot-for-shot remake of Psycho, and people were like, "Nah."
Right. Yeah, right. And it's like, but in 1960, this was brand new. This was something we hadn't seen. And if you watch Psycho, it's a fascinating film for a lot of reasons, not the least of which is Anthony Perkins doesn't appear in the film for quite some time.
Oh,
and the initial plot is was it Vera Miles? Not Vera Miles. Janet Leigh robbing a bank. I mean, the first time I ever watched Psycho, I was like, wait a minute, I thought this was Psycho.
What is this movie about? Yeah.
What is this movie about, right? But again, it's this thing with Alien is it's again, terrible romantic comedy, but it's a great horror film. And you can't divorce it, a movie, from its genre, I don't think. I mean, there are kinds of movies. I don't like slasher movies. I'm sure that there are examples of slasher movies out there that are great for that genre, that are cinematically viable and more than just viable, but good. But that's not my thing. I'm not going to go watch those kinds of movies.
Right.
That's just me. But that's not what these. I don't know. Them going back and looking at them. Yeah. Again, his review, their review, is just a haunted house in space. The thing I take issue with is the word "just."
Yeah. Right.
It's not just a haunted house in space. It's the greatest haunted house in space we've ever seen, right? I mean, there's the old argument that there are 5 stories or only 7 stories, man versus man, man versus himself, man versus nature, whatever. And we're just retelling them. Well, that's fine, but the key isn't in the underlying basic story. The key is in the execution of it. And Alien was executed with a tremendous amount of creativity and artistry.
Yeah, without question. A lot of people at the time thought so as well, because it was nominated for Best Art Direction at the Academy Awards, and it won the Academy Award for Visual Effects. And it went on to many other accolades. It won a Saturn Award for Best Science Fiction Film, Best Direction, and Best Supporting Actress for Veronica Cartwright. It was nominated for BAFTAs. It won the Hugo Award that year for Best Dramatic Presentation. And something we haven't talked about at all, which is a huge part of the film, Jerry Goldsmith's score was nominated for a Golden Globe and for a Grammy Award.
I did not know that, but it doesn't surprise me. It's a good score. I mean, it's not intrusive. I think it really it backs up what you're seeing on screen, but not in an intrusive way. Mm-hmm. So Best Art Direction Set Decoration it was nominated for, and it lost to All That Jazz.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
It's really interesting.
Which was fine, I'm sure, which was very good.
Yeah, All That Jazz was a good film, but it's really interesting to compare. The thing of it is and I would have to watch All That Jazz again. I haven't seen it in years, but the thing of it is, when you compare H.R. Giger's artwork to whatever was in All That Jazz, I'm going to guess that, and I again don't remember All That Jazz all that well, but one of the reasons I don't remember it is because there was nothing astonishing that I'd never seen before in my life. Otherwise, I would remember it. Right? I mean, that mostly takes place in the theater, and I'm sure it's a beautiful looking film, but with H.R. Giger, it was this brand new thing that also was vital to the success of the film. I mean, without H.R. Giger's art design, this movie could easily fall apart.
Sure. if it was like a wiggly octopus or, whatever some of the earlier designs that they were thinking of before they landed on Giger's art, if it had been like that, it might have still been a good film, but it would not have been as good as it became.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no. It contributed in many ways. I mean, it definitely brings with it a mood. And it was unique. This was something, brand new to cinema at the time, that vision of his art.
It's certainly
glad it was nominated.
Yeah. It certainly inspired a lot of imitators as well. Even Roger Corman himself, who made Galaxy of Terror in 1981. Do you have a favorite, like, alien knockoff type movie? I only ask because I can get you started. I absolutely do have an example. I'm trying to think of any that I've even seen. It's not the kind of film. I like horror films, but I like good horror films. I try to avoid bad horror films or mediocre horror. It's just I try to avoid bad or mediocre movies as it is anyway. But I don't know, something about horror. I want it to be particularly good. So there's not a lot of that sort of appeals to me out there. So yeah, if you've got something, lay it on me. Yeah, well, I'm the same way. I try to avoid bad movies if I can. Not saying that horror movies are bad, but so they tend to be, of B or C quality. And I'm not really a horror guy necessarily, but I do love an arresting film. And we just got done saying that this is not a good movie. This is definitely a B movie. But I really like the movie Event Horizon, which is sort of a similar setup. In fact, they take quite a few things from Alien. It's a sort of workaday crew that's, in hypersleep. They're on a ship and they have a particular mission and they find this other ship that ship is the haunted house ship. So they go onto this ship and things kind of go from there. But it's a movie from 1997 with Lawrence Fishburne in it. Of the Alien clones, that's the one that really kind of sticks with me.
I think I saw that. I can't be sure. I believe that I saw that film. I think I watched it on HBO or on a DVD or something.
Yeah.
And I do not remember virtually anything about it. Maybe I'll have to give it a rewatch. The fact that I don't remember anything about it tells me I didn't really love it.
Yeah.
but you never know. I mean,
They cut out the middleman in that movie because we've talked about sort of the demonic or devilish sort of actions or appearance of this alien, but it's just the literal devil, like in that movie.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, cut out the middleman. Right. Well,
right.
Go back to The Exorcist for that, right?
Yeah, right. There you go. They took that Star Wars meets The Exorcist thing literally.
Horror movies, for me, I like them when they're, subtle is not the right word, but when they're not as in your face as a lot of horror movies tend to be. I watched an old movie with Julie Christie called I think it was The Haunting, from 1963.
Right.
I watched that within the last year or two, and it's really, 1963 I think it was. So that's a very early sort of horror film. You had the monster movies with Dracula and Frankenstein and all this, but this is a movie that tried to be realistic. And really, when you watch the movie, there are not a lot of visual effects, and mostly it's sort of loud noises and nothing terribly frightening in terms of visuals. But again, you have to contextualize it to its era. But I think it was probably very effective for its time, and I enjoyed it, even though it wasn't. You couldn't hold it up to Alien and really compare the two, even though it was literally a haunted house movie. But it had really good acting in it, and you also weren't quite sure whether the house was haunted or Julie Christie was perhaps a little bit crazy, her character.
Yeah.
So.
That's a good element.
But yeah, movies. I tend to like movies that are less in your face. Horror movies that are less in your face. Psycho is not a movie that's really in your face. Like I say, it starts out with a friggin' bank robbery and a woman having an affair. It's like, wait a minute, where is this going? And The Exorcist was more. Exorcist was a good film and certainly more. in your face, but a film that was less in your face that I would consider a horror film is Rosemary's Baby.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I think that we definitely both agree that this is a masterpiece and not a disaster piece. But did you have any last sort of thoughts about the film? Is there anything that we haven't quite said about it?
Probably, but we've said an awful lot.
There's a lot to say. Yeah.
But I will repeat something I said earlier, which is that Alien holds up pretty well. I mean, it's a movie that at this point is 39 years old, 39 years from its release date, and despite what we talked about, the CRTs and the older technology and computer stuff, it still holds up very well. It's still very atmospheric, and even if you know what's happening, or what's going to happen, it's still a good ride to take.
Well, I liked what you said about like the CRTs and stuff. It's really kind of future-proof in that way because, who knows how things will develop. And even, another 40 years from now, I think you can still identify this as being future, but with a retro aesthetic, let's say,
right.
That sort of sets a tone.
I've seen the film a number of times at this point in my life. I don't know, 3, 4, 5 times, whatever. And watching it again, when you watch a film multiple times, it's easy to get bored by it, especially a film that relies on surprise at some points or a mounting sense of terror. And yet, even with all of that, it still held up for me. I still enjoyed watching it.
Yeah, there's just so many little things about the setting and the sets and just the performances. I think the last time I went through, I was really focusing on people's performances and the way that I know that the script is pretty complete and detailed, but there was a lot of improvisation on the set and just people sort of working and getting into their characters, and you can really see that stuff kind of come out, really comes alive.
Yeah.
But I mean, we could just go on and on and on for another hour or
Apparently
two, for sure. Yeah, so I think we'll just wrap it up there. Thanks, listeners, for joining us on the show. If you want to let us know how you felt about this movie, you can tell us on Facebook at facebook.com/craftdeservices. You can also find us on Twitter at craftdeservice. And we're on iTunes, we're on Stitcher, Google Play Podcasts, all those places. If you search there, subscribe, and rate us and review us, we'd appreciate it. It really helps us out. David, where can people find you online?
Online, my official website is drgiii.com. That's davidrgeorge3.com. I'm on Twitter at davidrgeorgii. I've got a movie review website called moviereviewsbygeorge.com. I'm on Instagram and everywhere else you can find me. I'm easy to find.
And the credits are rolling. This is Aaron for David saying, keep it real.